Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you back to this channel. I am Professor Oriaso Odongo, and my channel is Professor Oriaso Odongo Knowledge Hub. Today, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to talk to you about the politics of climate change. The politics of climate change. Now, in this important topic, I want to get you through certain topics here. I'm going to talk to you about the introduction, and then I also want to talk to you about why climate change is a political matter. After that, I will talk to you about what climate politics revolves around. And then I also want to talk to you about the various concerns that climate politics revolve around. And then I want to give you something about the debates, the cracks of climate change debate. And I want to synthesize those debates, and then I want to highlight some of the roles of state in climate change politics. And then lastly, the role of international community or global community in climate debate. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start by saying that climate change politics, just like any other politics, deals with issues of resource allocation. And these resource allocations have got to do with a number of things, particularly the countries and the international community that are actually within climate change adaptation and mitigation do spend resources on mitigation, on adaptation, on other issues also. And these politics are normally at global scale, at regional scale, at also national levels. And sometimes the politics are just around the policy frameworks that are there for the responses that nations and the national community put in place. And sometimes politics around climate change are on the issues of growth and development with regard to climate change, as well as issues around the interest of various countries and the priorities that are there for development. Ladies and gentlemen, the politics of climate change is as old as the initial works of World Meteorological Association and the works of the United Nations and the work of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and even the formation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we all know that climate change impacts have been very dire, particularly as regards the socioeconomic and biophysical environment. And climate change politics is connected with climate change economics because it deals with resource allocation. And so then people are normally not debating the fact that climate change is a real issue now. So what remains to be answered particularly is, why is climate change a political issue? And we know that the scientific revelation has been here with us that climate change is real, and so this issue has taken center stage and that it has become a public international issue. And if you look around, you will see a very great percentage of debates that we have at global level, at regional level, at national levels, revolve around climate change. And if you look at even the involvement of World Meteorological Organization, the IPCC we are talking about, and the UNFCCC, and even the initial involvement of the United States and under the former President Al Gore, a lot of consciousness of the public were raised around the issues of climate change, and also suspicions that come with such kind of debates. And it has been very global. And we also know that there's a lot of literature from science and from media around issues of climate change. And we all know at the moment that we can't say that we have a unifying climate change politics, because the globe has been divided as regards what people believe and what people don't believe. You can imagine that there are part of the globe where people focus on technology for adaptation and mitigations. There are other parts where people are concentrating much more on solar and nuclear fusion, where we are also really concentrating on clean energy and even a mixture of those mitigation and adaptations. And we are also talking about international agreements and all strategies around the greenhouse gas emissions. So politics that we are having of climate change has actually driven us, has partitioned us into all those areas, depending on what we believe climate change is. And climate change politics revolve around issues like potential impact of climate change and even the impact themselves. So there are people who still believe that climate change impacts are not as dire as people think. And so politics around development come in. Do we put all our resources, do we put all our energy in addressing climate change, particularly at the expense of development agenda that we are having? Then we also have politics surrounding the economics of the responses that are being proposed. So look at climate change responses in terms of adaptation, in terms of mitigation, and the cost implications. So many states and even the regions and even the global community are sensitive about the cost implication of addressing climate change. And so politics come in this. The other area where climate change politics revolve is the area of national growth and development. There's been a debate around, do we put resources on mitigating or adapting to climate change, or do we go on with our development agenda and priorities? We should not forget that nations are about development and about priorities that they have set for their people. And if we are to prioritize climate change adaptation or mitigation ahead of some sort of development, economic development, then the politics originate from there. There is also politics around mainstreaming technology in climate change responses. Look at the politics around the green energy or adopting clean energy at the expense, particularly of some energy that will produce huge amount of power to drive economy. Many nations are thinking about, if we were to go, for example, green, and we are not as developed as other countries, there is something that we will lose at the end. And so politics come around there. There are also issues around scenario building and issues around changing lifestyles. So we've been able to see the social adaptation for climate change. Is it possible that we can have lifestyle adjustments that are going to respond to climate change in a way that enables us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, for example? Those are some of the places where politics come about. Policies around the responses and mitigations, policy perspectives in this, and then politics at national, regional levels, particularly with regard to the fact that the public have perceived this matter, and even the public are also at the center of adaptation and mitigation. We also have politics around international treaties and legislations and even conventions that we are signing, and so that we become part of the global community energizing the fight against climate change. Even the instruments, you can imagine how many nations are willing to sign all these, and to sign or not to sign is dependent upon the politics that is there with regard to the priorities that these countries are having. Now, so this would elicit a lot of political concerns. So we have a lot of political concerns that are raised by climate change, which is why we still think about the politics as an important factor with regard to climate change responses. We have issues around management of risks. And in regard to management of risks, we know that climate science is being challenged by those people or those countries that want to scale down on the level of urgency of climate change. There are countries in the world that still believe that climate change is not an urgent matter, so they would prioritize other issues as very urgent. So if we happen to imagine that there are those kind of states that want to scale down on the level of urgency, vis-a-vis those states that want to scale down on economic development, so you can imagine that. So if you want to scale down on the urgency so that you prioritize other issues, and if you want to scale up on the issues of economic development, something has to be able to give. Think about scaling up on economic development, particularly if countries are to pick on using the unclean energy, non-renewable energy, for example, to spur development. It is said that this kind of energy will be very quick in spurring economic development, driving industries. And then we also have politics around replanning. When climate change is real the way it is, so there is need for politics of replanning. We know very well the way states work and the entire state crafting. And we know that normally states sometimes to a large extent plan short term. But then with climate change within us, there is need for us to change from that short-term planning to long-term planning, even including integration of climate issues in all public policies and public sectors, for example. And also you think about the integration of market-oriented approaches. So we talk about these approaches like carbon pricing, and we talk about regulation, energy efficiency, we talk about transport and land use and promotion of scientific technology, even lifestyle and behavior change. Look at all this kind of replanning which must take place. And don't forget the fact that sometimes even the extent of governance in these states. For example, in Africa, in most African countries, a president will be there in office for 4 to 5 years, for example. So bringing in climate change within all sectors in a period that surpasses that 5-year term becomes an issue that is also of concern, particularly. We also think about the rethinking of national priority. We know that every nation prioritizes its audience, its citizens, for example, and even the political agenda that they have of the political elites. And so when you bring in climate change and you rethink about national priority, if your priority was supposed to do 1 or 2 things that you hold dear and with your people, and which the political class are aligned to, and then the climate change issues come and you have to change the planning, changing even the vision. The other issue that is of concern is creating the political and public consensus. Many nations, as we know them, are actually now supposed to replace those short-term partnerships with long-termism, the way I have been able to mention. And governance of many states in the wake of climate change will now have to be as democratic as possible, which many states do not want. Is it possible that an ambivalent public opinion can then be replaced with the long-term thinking that is required of climate change? Those are the kind of things we are thinking about. The other issue that is of concern could be the issues around social justice. And we know about social justice and climate change. Is it possible? Because so many questions will arise on how climate change policies can be perceived equitably by all key actors in a state. Think about a state as comprising both the haves and the have-nots. Just like within the international community, we also have the developed, the least developed, and the developing nations, for example. So if you bring in climate change into the mix and you think about social justice issues with the very high socioeconomic cost of climate change, and people might think that it might really negatively affect the underprivileged, and that is an issue of concern. The other one could be implications of changing the political philosophy of a country. If you bring in climate change and you imagine you have to rework, you have to reboot even the philosophical thinking of the various states we are having. Look at democratic governance that we are having, which can be very important with climate change, so that you accept the views of all parties in a country. And that actually is supposed to reboot and change that authoritarian thinking that determine the prosperity of many states. So those are things that are important. And I don't want to miss to talk about the issues that are bringing politics in climate change under the crux of the debate in climate change. And I want to say that climate change debate, as we know it today, or the original climate change debates as we know it, is a controversial one. And this controversy pits 3 groups of people. So we have the skeptics, then we have the mainstreamists, and then we have the radicals. So these are things that we have heard about. So what do the 3 groups think about climate change, and attendant debate, or even mitigation, or even agency, or even adaptation, or even the collective engagement with regard to international treaties and legislations, for example. So skeptics are people we know about their debate and what they think. They believe that the climate change is not resulting from human activities. For example, they think that it is unproven for scientists to claim that climate change results from human activities. They strongly believe that climate change is a natural process, as it were. And you see where such debates occur, and people think that, these people think that the current situation that we are seeing, whatever we say has changed, is just a normal process, and that things are just the same and they were predestined to change that way. Other skeptics even say that climate change is real, and it is also human, but the impact of climate change is the one that has been overblown. It is the one which has been over-exaggerated. And skeptics normally say that there are more urgent issues like poverty, issues like HIV and AIDS, issues like the spread of nuclear weapons are more urgent and more worrying. And they pose more danger than you could think about climate change. So look at that group of people, the skeptics, and look at the way they understand and conceptualize the debate around climate change. Then we have the climate change mainstream view, or mainstreamist, and what they think. And this thinking is advanced by IPCC and other scientific researchers who believe that climate change is real, and it is an embodiment of human activities as well as natural activities, as it were. And then the climate change impact is so dire that we need to both mitigate and adapt. And they mostly blame climate change on human activities. But they also believe that climate change responses are possible and are capable of supporting sustainable development practices, as it were. And they are at the core of the efforts that we are having. So most of these efforts that we are having around mitigation and adaptation are as a result of a lot of work that has been done by the climate mainstream view around climate change. And skeptics refute this thinking, and they say that these people are paid to even give us unproven facts. So the skeptics normally term themselves as the ones who are very independent thinkers. They think that there are people who are sitting somewhere and paying scientists to come up with these revelations, or to come up with these measures that will drive the whole world crazy around that. And then the last group of people who are also joining in this debate are the radicals. The radicals believe that climate change is real. And they say that climate change impacts are even much more worse than the IPCC and mainstreamists are even able to report. They say that these people, to a large extent, are not telling people the actual truth. The truth is that it is much worse than they are able to give us. And they believe that natural processes are also as important as human activities, particularly with regard to where climate change is coming from. So they rope in both human process, and then they also bring in the natural processes. And they believe that it doesn't take quite long for us to prove that climate change has happened. Many IPCC and mainstreamists believe that for you to confirm that climate change has occurred, you think about around 30 years, a relatively longer time. For them, they say you can notice that climate change has happened. Even between 5 and 10 years is enough for us. And they believe that there are several tipping points. And they say there's a possibility that the ice field that cover Antarctica, the one we talked about in the last presentation, are normally even melting and degrading even as we talk about it now. And there's a possibility of a huge amount of methane, huge amount of greenhouse gases that will be added again into the atmosphere and worsen the situation. some of these radicals even believe that it is even too late for us to mitigate. That mitigation alone will not change things, and so we just need to live with the impacts of climate change through having effective adaptation. That's what we are thinking about. So if you look at those three groups of debaters around climate change, it is important to highlight that they form a very big chunk of what people talk about and what actually also influences how people conceive, perceive, and respond to climate change issues. And with this, even the publics are normally being influenced. Imagine where we have three different opposing positions. Look at the climate change radicals. Look at climate change skeptics, and then look at climate change mainstreamists. They're different views, even though mainstreamists and radicals agree. And so the skeptics will say it's not the case. So where you find three opposing debates, even the public get confused. They will now think like this thing is not even proven. And so that changes the politics, because the politics of a country to a large extent is also dependent upon the electorate or the public or the voters. If the voters don't give you opportunity to act, particularly with during this era of very advanced constitutionalism, where the publics play a major role even in constitutionalism, you find that they deny you a chance to participate in the national, in signing or even ratifying international legislations, because they think you are dealing with issues that are no longer important. But then the debate is so important because political leaders are supposed to keep track of all these debates around climate change so that they have a lot of data that they use to make the policies that we are talking about. Even the states and the CBOs, the NGOs, even the businesses and even international organizations are supposed to be very important in these debates because they are important actors in climate change. So climate change debates influence public perceptions on climate change, and they will easily determine their responses to the impact of climate change. And these debates, as it were, they also affect our involvement. They influence involvement of states or region in global climate conventions. They actually determine their commitments to a large extent. Because when people go to discuss climate change issues with the aim of coming up with a common position, people go there as states with agenda and their interest. They sometimes come as regions, and each region has got its agenda prioritized. And so such kind of prioritization will to a large extent depend on politics of the countries, politics of the region, and even goes to the politics at that global level. Ladies and gentlemen, let me talk with you about the role of states in climate change politics now. The states are important, and just like I had said previously, climate change politics is influenced by state and public interest. And you can imagine when climate change became an issue, an urgent matter, and the United Nations General Assembly convened very quickly, and membership formed the IPCC. You can imagine that the members of the United Nations came together and formed that, and they agreed in unison that the climate change had to be addressed. So you can begin to see the role of state. So it is the state that will accept that they form part of the global community. And once that happens, you know what happens in such kind of international engagements. So many states have got more pressing issues to prioritize. Sometimes the more they have issues to prioritize, the more they feel like some issues are not urgent. And because most states plan short term, it would require them to reboot their planning so that they adopt the planning demanded and required by climate change. So how can states plan long-term beyond the term limits of president, for example? That is a major question that is normally asked. And so in such kind of situations, the only way out could be in every given state we could have cross-party consensus people. So we can even have in Parliament, we deal with climate change not as an issue of a political party where the president comes from. We take it to mean every political class or every political entity has climate change as an issue. And so when the issues of climate change come, it is addressed nationally, as it were. Nations and people who are discussing climate change issues, they look at political capital in everything they do. And even this influences their decisions that they make before they become party to those policy-based responses that we're talking about. So the role of state, to some extent, also is to provide enabling regulatory frameworks that will steer climate change responses that we are talking about. The role of state is to implement also these legislations, among others. We talk about the role of state in instituting climate change sensitive planning. So every state plans many things. They have short-term, medium-term, and long-term planning. So they're the ones who will plan. They come up with contingency plans for managing a number of things, including plans to manage even the offshoots of climate change, like maybe drought, disaster, earthquakes that are coming, floods that come around. So this is the states that will come up with those kind of contingency plans. The states also implement these plans, and they even regulate the planning. Maybe look at the rural and urban planning, for example. So that if we are supposed to have climate-sensitive planning, the state must be there. So the state should have enabling and ensuring roles. If a state has got an enabling role, it means that the state is normally very much stimulative. They become very stimulative to issues around climate change. And if they have enabling roles, then we could say they endeavor to achieve the defined outcomes that are supposed to meet the targets of climate change, like emission reduction targets that we are setting. And they also deal with the planning, bringing environment, climate issues into all branches of government. They could do this to ensure that climate change is mainstreamed in all sectors of economy. Remember what we had said in our last presentation about the sector-specific impacts of climate change, or sector-specific contributions of climate change. We talk about them. So if we were to mainstream climate change in all sectors of the economy of a nation, then that is what we are talking about. And planning, therefore, cannot be, particularly of climate change, relegated to or be reduced to just being done by one sector or one agency within a state. So it's supposed to be a collective activity even within a state, just like it is also a collective activity within a region, and just like we also say it is supposed to be a collective activity at a global level. So the state is the key medium of forging these treaties. We talk about the global treaties or regional treaties. The state is at the center of it. They are the ones who are coming together, deciding to come together to do this. They don't work alone, just like we have been able to say. So we talk about politics of mitigation and sustainable development for prosperity of this nation. If we are living in a climate-sensitive environment, and our politics has to be tempered by the reality of climate change. So whenever we are doing our politics, there are politics of mitigation, politics of adaptation, which are able to permit the politics of sustainable development. Then there is need for us to be doing replanning. We replan, we return to the planning that is climate sensitive, that will accommodate all the dynamics or the issues around addressing climate change. And there is a need for what we call the common perspective that will integrate a lot about climate, even integrating political philosophy that is going to be good for us. There is a general Western philosophy around climate change, like going green. So we adopt going green philosophy. It is the state that will do that, and then they join together in a region, or the issue can be spread across the globe, and nations that are interested in fighting climate change pick it up. And so we can also think about the role of global community in this politics. And I remember having said at the outset that the origins of climate change legislation is international, at a global level, as it were. And so climate change is a global issue, so we cannot divorce the politics of climate change from politics of the global community, for example. So climate change politics emanate from the global community, as it were, because the impacts of climate change are at global scale. And the effective responses to climate change are those responses that are actually originated at that level and then cascaded. And so we've used them to fight climate change. Think about even how we lobby. When states are going to meet at COP, how they do political lobbying. Look at those realignments that are there. So the global community has a major role in terms of coming up with these treaties, coming up with these conventions. But in doing so, there's a lot of lobbying, a lot of cajoling, a lot of issues that they go through. Look at even ratifying, signing the treaties and then ratifying them back at home, and the influence of the global community in a country's willingness or not of ratifying these legislations. So in conclusion, we can say that the climate change politics is an important politics that we have, and it's kind of a very sensitive and different kind, because it is a politics that cannot be played within one given state. It's politics that combine a number of states, and it requires global cooperation. It requires us to look for consensus so that we can have climate change issues addressed through favorable politics. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to stop here with this presentation, and I want to just remind you that in this presentation I took you through a number of things. We introduced climate change politics, and I went to talk to you about why climate change is a political issue. And I went to discuss with you some of the political concerns that climate change raises, and I mentioned quite a number of them. Then I went into the crux of climate change debate, the debate from skeptics, mainstreamists, and the radicals. And then I went to the role of state in climate politics. And then I crowned it with the role of the global community in climate politics. I want to stop there, and thank you so much for listening to me. And I wish to just to remind you once again to like, to share, and to subscribe to this channel, because we have so many exciting discussions that we will have here, only on Professor Silas Odongo Knowledge Hub. Thank you, and see you again.